All right, so today we are looking at cardio for sports performance, right? So we talked yesterday about the flexibility part. We're working our way through, all the aspects of program design, right? We talk about, when it comes to program design, we talk about, the flexibility training. At first, like if we're going down, I need to fix this. This darn thing, I keep leaving this all filled out. We go down through a flexibility, then we move into cardio, into movement prep, right? And movement prep is where we're talking about core, balance, and reactive training. Good Lord. So oh my God. All right, so when we look at this, I'm sorry. I keep hitting the wrong button over and over and over again, and I'm surprising myself. Get out of here, all of this wrong button stuff. So we are working our way through this program design class. We're going through the warm-up stuff, which means we're going to talk about flexibility and cardio. We're going through movement prep, where we're going to have today we're going to get through core as well. Then we'll talk about balance and reactive training tomorrow. Speed, agility, and quickness training, so how to do all that fun stuff on the field. Resistance training, where we're talking about like chest, back, shoulders, legs, biceps, triceps, everything. And then obviously total body. And then we've got like our cool down, which is again going to be like the flexibility stuff. So, the upcoming days, it's kind of like we're working our way through these OPT, through the OPT template, right? Like today we're going to finish up what is essentially the warm-up section. Like sometimes you'll see some trainers, they'll write like their SMR stuff, and then they'll write their stretches stuff. And then here they'll kind of like, they'll just put their cardio here. And like the cardio section, they'll use it as like, one set of 30 minutes, 60%, 65% heart rate max, something kind of simple like that. I don't do it that way. I kind of like to, and only because like I tend to modify my own OPT templates. Like if I have a cardio day, I like to kind of like basically delete everything and just leave it like this, and then put my own little cardio section in there, and then be like treadmill, one set, 30 minutes, 65% heart rate max. That's kind of how I like to do it personally. I don't think that's necessarily right or wrong, but like, you're gonna do like whatever version of this you like to do. But anyway, long explanation, very long. Long explanation, not short. That's what we're talking about today. We're going to be talking about cardio and stuff. And so remember the sports book, because it sort of it jumps right into the program design aspects of things. We are also going to talk a little bit about like, the physiologic and anatomic principles of cardiorespiratory training as well. So our objectives for cardiorespiratory training, right? We want to describe like how to, use it in integrated training, like how to write this program effectively, provide guidelines for how to actually like, put it on paper, and understand the importance of interval training, which is always really exciting to talk about. And then also design like an actual cardiorespiratory training program. So cardio training is sort of, I'd say it's the most skipped aspect of most people's workout routines, Noel, Robert, Charlie, have you guys skipped cardio in the recent history? Anybody?
Yeah.
It's okay. This is a
I've been doing walking though, kind of.
Well, that's good. That's good. We'll take walking.
Yeah.
But yeah, it tends to be the number one. It tends to be the thing that people skip the most. The way I like to put it is like cardio is, there's no in between. It's like cardio is either your favorite thing or your least favorite thing. Like I love going for a run. I love getting like, just super sweaty. When I'm back in Oregon, I absolutely love going trail running. And it always rains in Oregon. So I just look forward to it so much, where like my favorite thing is to strap on like a baseball cap and like a hood, like a hoodie. And I'll bring it up and just like tie it kind of tight. And like I got my headphones in, and then just I'm in like shorts, and just go for a run and just get soaking wet. And then like, if you do it really hard enough, you get back to your car and like it's really cold out, but your body is super hot. So you're just like steam venting off of you. I love that. And I miss it. And I'm going to do it in LA because it never rains out here. But that's like, I mean, like that, you're either really in love with cardio or you're really in love with like strength training. I feel like it's the stuff that people tend to skip. But it's your conditioning, right? When we're talking about it from the aspect of like an athlete's perspective, let's change the conversation a little bit. Let's stop calling it cardio and let's start calling it conditioning, right? This is going to condition you for your sport. This is going to condition you for whatever athletic event you want to partake in. And so understanding that, right, we can use it to improve our performance. The other nice things about like cardio is like it's so good for you to help you reduce like mentally, did I say reduce mentally? I read the word reduce. Relax mentally. Like me, I have a hard time like meditating, but meditation's incredibly good for you. I mean, there's countless studies that talk about the benefits of meditation, and yet it's just one of those things that like I tend to like struggle participating in. It's just not something I do all that often, but I love going for a run and being alone with my thoughts, and it's like different workouts at different times. Sometimes I'll go for a run and it's just like a general jog to be alone with my thoughts, and I'm working on my endurance in general, right? I'm just kind of building that foundational like steady state stuff. And then other times it's like, all right, like I don't have time to like meditate because I'm working really, really freaking hard today. I'm going to get super completely out of breath and then, recover and do as many rounds as possible. On Thursday, lately I've been doing, just because it's so convenient and it's close to my house, lately I've been doing kind of the same cardio routine, which is like, I just go up to, have you guys been to Fryman Canyon? It's off of like Laurel. It's a super awesome trail if you get a chance to go up there. And I think it's 6 miles if you do this one specific loop. Like if you go from start all the way up and then you go through this like little extra section up the street, down, and then like hit the end of the trail and then like reverse and do the whole thing back to the parking lot. I think that comes out to around 6 miles. I need to actually like do it on my GPS watch. So it'll tell me like how far it actually is. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. If you guys get a chance, it is a great way to do some uphill running, because the whole thing is like up and then straight back down. There's no there's very, very, very little flat to Fryman Canyon. And so like my favorite workout is to go out there and I'll do different work to rest ratios, which is something we're going to talk a lot about today. We're going to talk about work to rest ratios and how you can use them to target different energy systems. And so I'll do like 30 seconds of work and like 90 seconds of rest, or 15 seconds of work and 30 seconds of rest if I'm doing a 1-to-2 ratio, or maybe I'll do a 1-to-3 ratio where I'll do 15 seconds of work, 45 seconds of rest. There's a million different versions of like what you can do. And I'll go up there and I'll basically sprint up the hill, and then like, my timer will go off and I'll turn around and I'll walk back or jog back down in the opposite direction. And then my timer will go off again, and that's time to start the next interval, and I'll, work my way. And so I'll just very slowly kind of zigzag my way up this big long hill. And it's a great way to make that hill last longer. And it's a terrific, terrific, terrific workout. It's super fun. It feels just like you hit the weights in terms of like the effort you put in. You're walking out of there, with noodle legs. So it's great. But that's the type of conditioning that helps me in like my sports, like if I was a football player, that let's say I was like an NFL lineman, that type of cardio is not really the type of conditioning that I need, right? Instead I need to focus much more on like very explosive, shorter duration, longer rest period cardio, So I wanted you guys to kind of shift to the idea of cardio today. Let's get away from the idea of like, doing a general cardio workout, which we usually use just for calorie burning. And let's talk about how to specifically target either our aerobic, depending on what type of athlete we are, or anaerobic energy systems, and look at, look at this cardio from the aspect of conditioning ourselves for our sport. There's our intro. Let's go ahead and talk about our energy systems here. So, Charlie, I think this is the first time you're gonna ever see this stuff. I love talking about energy systems. Energy systems are really cool, but everything in your body, every action that you make, every single physiologic process that occurs when your body does stuff, any of the things, right? When your body does any of the things, it requires this specific molecule called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. And what ATP is like, ATP is basically stored energy. Like everything in the universe takes energy in order to like make it happen, right? But when we look at like adenosine, when we look at ATP, it's this compound that looks kind of like this in its chemical form. You can see like what this is. This is a little molecule. That's not helpful at all. This little molecule of adenosine, and then there's these three what are called phosphates over here. And that, it doesn't look super great in that picture. My favorite version is actually just a much simpler drawing. Yeah, I like this version. So you can see here's your adenosine, and there's your three phosphates. And the reason we have ATP is because, like I said, it takes energy in order for you to do work. And like energy, we kind of need to like, think about it as like, like there's like when you have like your oven running, like you're generating heat energy, right? And so like all the heat that's in there is being passed into your food, which is like chemically and molecularly changing it, and it's transferring all that energy to that food to cook it and make it safe to eat. There's a lot of different ways that we have energy, right? It exists in many different forms. And what we're doing is we're taking that chemical energy and we're converting it or breaking it down into metabolic energy in order for us to do work, right? Like, how do you take like a hamburger and convert it into 50 squats, right? Well, that process is really what we're talking about when we talk about metabolism. So when I say like something is metabolic, if I'm describing metabolism, what I'm describing is, turning hamburgers into squats, turning burritos into lunges, and turning pancakes into burpees, like that's the study of what we call bioenergetics. And it's converting, food into chemical energy, and then using that chemical energy to break it down in order to do physical mechanical energy, like physical work, right? And so now all of that energy, right? Like energy is super like unstable when it's in its like natural form. Like heat energy, like look at fire, right? Like if you look at like flames, I'm just gonna put a picture of like flames. When you look at these things, right? Like all of this is basically just a ton of energy being released in the atmosphere. It's like, and it's chaotic and it's going all over the place and it's crazy, right? So because that's so chaotic, our body can't handle storing energy directly. Like it can't store energy because we would just overheat and die, right? Also, it would just burn up and then it would be gone, and then we wouldn't be able to like use it when we need it. Like right now, everybody for the most part is probably sitting down. You're not burning very much energy. So like if you had all this energy being released, it would just have nowhere to go. So what it would do is it would just kind of raise your body temperature and overheat you. And you would have to burn that energy off by going and doing something physical. But then because it's so chaotic and just burning so brightly, turns out you're going to completely run out of energy, and then your body's not going to be able to run its systems, and then that's going to cause you to expire. So both those versions are bad. So what we have instead, the way we store energy inside of our body, is we store it as this molecule ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And if we give it a definition, right, it is a high energy molecule that our bodies use as a fuel source for all metabolic activity. Now, how are we able to use the energy trapped in ATP? Well, if you look at it, right, again, this is like a little molecule of, they call it adenosine, right? And it's adenine paired with like a little sugar molecule here. And so we've got adenosine here, and then there are these 3 phosphates. And these 3 phosphates are kind of like, they're kind of like kids on a school bus. You remember like riding the bus to school? And it was like, you know, those seats without seat, you know, there's just those kind of big empty seats and stuff. And like, you know, like you could fit 3 kids on those seats, but nobody, like everybody hated that 3rd kid. Like, you only wanted to have like 2 people to a seat, and like every now and then it would get full, and you know, you'd have to shove a 3rd kid on there, and so then all 3 of you'd be kind of cramped, and all you ever wanted to do was shove that 3rd kid off into the aisle and get him to go somewhere else, you know. Like, that's kind of what ATP is like. That's what these 3 phosphates are like. These 3 phosphates they have a ton of energy trapped within their little bonds, particularly right here. So see how there's this little chemical bond holding this phosphate to this one, right? There's a lot of energy trapped in the middle of that bond. So what your body does is it stores all of its energy in the form of ATP. And then when it needs a little bit of energy, what it'll do is it'll break this phosphate off. And it actually kind of looks like this. So it'll break this phosphate off, right? And convert it into what we call ADP, adenosine diphosphate. So you're left with an empty phosphate and then a molecule of adenosine tied to 2 other phosphates, right? Meanwhile, a bunch of energy is released. Your body captures that energy and uses it to do work, to do all the stuff, right? Let's see here. Break to ATP. So it kind of looks something like this if I've got it doing what I want it to do. Oh, it's the other way around. I don't want to reconstitute it. I want to break it. Close, internet, close. Here we go. That's totally what I want. I just want a version before it's done. All right, well, it's not a GIF, but there it is. I'll take it. I'll take a picture. All right, so it looks like this, right? You've got ATP, that's adenosine tri for 3-phosphate. You break that 3rd phosphate off, a ton of energy is released that is trapped within that bond there. And then you are left with ADP, which your body can reconstitute later. Your body can take that ADP, it can shove another phosphate on there, and guess what? You just stored some more energy, and then you can break that down again later. In fact, when we're lifting at super high intensities, when we are in the maximum strength or power phase, we're using creatine as like a fuel source, even though creatine doesn't have any energy of its own, because what it does do is it has enzymes that allow us to reattach that 3rd phosphate. So we attach it, we break it off, release some energy, we reattach it, we break it off, that releases some energy, and we just kind of reattach and break it over and over and over again, super, super, super rapidly. Problem is that only lasts about 15 seconds at the longest. Usually it's even shorter than that. So that is sort of how ATP works. So there's a lot of energy trapped in between the phosphates bonds. When those bonds are broken, energy is released, and our bodies capture that energy to pay for the work that our cells do. So all of your cells need to pay for their ability to do work with ATP. So any questions or comments on that? Is that pretty clear to everybody? Are we feeling good about that? Okay, so talking about how we produce ATP is going to be a really big part of our job as trainers, right? We have to understand how we can synthesize ATP. How does our body make energy on the go while we're doing work, right? Well, there's a couple different ways. That we can produce ATP, right? Because we do need to make this stuff. We have to make it as we're going. The more we are able to make it, the better we are able to do work. This is why we need to eat food, right? We need to eat food and we need to breathe oxygen. Both of those things are hugely important for us in order to be able to make energy, right? This is why like Frankenstein's monster doesn't work the way people think it does, right? Like Mary Shelley was like, oh yeah, you just run electricity through a dead body and it brings that dead body back to life. Yeah, your nervous system does use electrochemical signals in order to like do work. So she nailed it there. But like the ability, like all of those cells' ability to produce energy died when the cells died. And so like I hate to do this, but there can never be a zombie. Like that's just never going to be a thing in the world. Maybe like a rabies version, you know, where it's just like a crazy human. But like there's like the idea of like bringing the dead back to life. It's lost its ability to produce ATP because the cells can no longer utilize oxygen and produce ATP. So without being able to produce ATP, you can't make any of the systems of the body function. So how do we produce ATP, right? What keeps us moving? What keeps us alive, right? This is also one of the reasons why like oxygen is something that you can go, I don't know, a couple minutes without, whereas like food, you can go a couple like days without, right? Like, but at the same time, without either of those things, eventually, like that's the end of us, you know? So there's two main systems metabolically for producing energy, right? And so those two main systems are going to be the anaerobic category. Anaerobic stands for without oxygen, okay? So when I say anaerobic, what I mean is absence of oxygen. So like A for opposite, aerobic for oxygen. And your anaerobic energy system, there are two parts to it. There's two parts to this. There is either the ATP-PC system, which is your adenosine triphosphate phosphocreatine system. And that's one of the ways that our body is able to reconstitute ATP. Like I said, if we look at like, let's see if I can find a GIF of this, ATP-PC system GIF. Hook me up, internet. You know what? Actually, I think this video might do it. It's only a minute long. This could be perfect. So I have a good feeling. Let's see if my internet will load the video. Why take it so long?
As you can see here, we have our adenosine molecule. And
This is kind of funny because it's on a carpet.
Attached. These phosphate groups are joined together by high intensity bonds. This is known as adenosine triphosphate, or for short, ATP. The easy way to remember this is tri is the prefix for 3. We can often refer this to as a fully charged battery.
I like that.
For energy to be released, one of these phosphate groups needs to break off. So we'll break this one off. And when that happens, when that bond breaks, this produces a great amount of energy, which is here. We now only have 2 phosphate groups. So now this is called adenosine diphosphate. And this is a hard charged battery. In order for it to become fully charged, energy needs to be present.
Okay, so you are left with ADP. She broke off the phosphate, right? A bunch of energy was released. Now we've used that ATP up. But now we're left with ADP. So how do we get more energy? We need to reattach a phosphate here in order to be able to, like, you know, break it again. So that's what's going to happen next.
And this happens through the splitting of creatine phosphate. So this begins as 1. Then this one breaks off, which produces energy. This energy is then used to join this phosphate back onto the chain. And this cycle will happen again.
Cool. There we go. She did a great job. So that is ATP PC in a nutshell. So this is your ATP ATP PC system, or your this is sometimes referred to as your phosphagen system. Sometimes you'll hear that term, or sometimes you'll hear it referred to as the ATP CP system, which is just they flip these words around, and so it becomes the adenosine triphosphate creatine phosphate system. Doesn't matter. I don't care which one you call it. All of them mean the same thing. But what you are using is you are actually using creatine's phosphates to reattach to your own burnt up ATP molecules to reconstitute them. This is why people take creatine as a supplement when they're doing like heavy lifting. And just to talk about creatine like as a supplement here real quick, you guys have heard me talk about supplementation here and there. I'm not a huge fan of supplements. Like very rarely do I take vitamins or minerals or anything like that. I'm just not a very big supplementation guy personally. However, just to tell you, like long-term scientific research, a lot of people love to ask, and you're going to get this question all the time, guys. You're going to get these questions where people are like, what's the best supplement to take? Like, what's been proven to work, And like, I'm not saying like a multivitamin can't help and be used to fill in the gaps. I'm not saying fish oil pills are not, I'm not saying they don't do anything. But what I am saying is like, in the world of supplementation, in terms of like actually improving your fitness levels and like helping you move the way you're supposed to, for the most part, you've got three. The three that have been proven to work is regular old caffeine. So a coffee has been shown in every trial ever done to improve sports performance, which makes sense because like it wakes up your nervous system. Whey protein, because it's so easily absorbable. Whey tends to get into your bloodstream incredibly quickly. And so because of that, obviously like getting protein into your body faster after a workout has always been shown to be effective. And lastly, the third one is creatine. And those are really the only three supplements that like I would say would be on a shadow of a doubt have been proven to work. And creatine, but here's the thing about creatine, it's not used for everything. Like a lot of people will use creatine and they'll use it to, try to improve their muscle growth and like their strength simultaneously, but they'll also sometimes try to use it to lose weight and they'll just take it as like a supplement. That's not what it's used for. Creatine is something that is used to fuel this ATP PC system, right? And, the ATP PC system only lasts 5, maybe up to 15 seconds for the most part. Like this is an incredibly intense energy system, right? This is an incredibly intense, very short duration energy system. Your body already naturally produces creatine. It already does that naturally. You're just elevating the levels to make sure that like you might be able to last in that ATP PC system just a little bit longer if you take it as a supplement. So normally this lasts 5 to 10 seconds. Maybe you can get it to last a little bit longer. But what the ATP PC system is used for is it's used for our maximum intensity, super short duration lifts. So when you lift something incredibly heavy, and like you can only lift it for maybe 10 seconds. Like imagine doing like your 3 rep max, right? Like on a deadlift, like 1, 2, and then you got that like 3, maybe 10, 15 seconds under tension, right? And then you're like, try to do 4, can't do 4, right? That's how heavy it is. That means that you are training directly in this ATP PC system. And I know this doesn't sound like cardio. Like I know this doesn't sound like we're talking about cardio today. And when you think of cardio, you think of like marathon running, right? But this is where all cardio starts. It's, because you're going to work your way through these energy systems. In fact, I'm going to make my own chart here because I can't imagine having the chart that I want to have exist. This is kind of how your energy systems are sort of going to work here. I'll go like this. So you've got your anaerobic energy systems. That's where it starts. So your anaerobic energy systems are the first part. And then you've got your aerobic energy systems. Those are the second part. That's what you're thinking of. That's what people tend to think of when they think of cardio, right? They tend to think of the aerobic energy systems. The long duration, the long slog cardio, right? Where you're really just like doing it for a while, right? And so in the anaerobic energy systems, it starts with the ATP PC system. And then it's gonna, and that lasts, like I said, this is gonna last 5 to 15 seconds, depending on who you ask. You can see we've got it written in our notes as 5 to 10 seconds. And that's not inaccurate, it's just not, there's a lot of research that says that it can last a little bit longer. So it starts with your ATP PC system, and it's going to work its way, in this direct. Okay, maybe I won't do it like this. Maybe it's going to work its way, from here over to here, over to here, over to here, right? So it's our energy systems are going in this direction, right? And so this is 5 to 15 seconds worth of time. That's our anaerobic energy system. And we're eventually going to work our way out of that, right? What happens now if you continue doing cardio longer than that, right? What happens if you start doing it for 20 seconds? Well, then you got to switch into a new energy system. So your body's going to kind of hand off energy production to this separate part of your energy system. So we need ATP to do work. We have our anaerobic energy systems, which we're currently talking about, and we have our aerobic energy systems, which is like our long duration stuff that we're going to talk about. You make all of this energy within all of your cells, right? All of your cells have the ability to produce this energy, but there's a couple different places that we make that energy. There is, like for instance, the anaerobic stuff, right? That's happening just in your cells in general. But the aerobic stuff happens in these specialized little, almost bacteria, little organelles inside of our cells called mitochondria. That's where we produce our long duration energy, right? That's where we get our aerobic energy from. So we're going to use that for like that's our main system used for like rest or prolonged exercise, like our gentle stuff. And then we have our anaerobic glycolytic system, which we're going to talk about here in just a second. This PowerPoint's in a very stupid order. It's going backwards. So I'm actually going to start here and then work our way backwards because this PowerPoint's dumb. So we start with the ATP-PC system. That lasts maybe 15 seconds. Then we're going to go into glycolysis. Now, glycolysis is a different energy system. This is actually producing ATP. So when you look at glycolysis, what's happening is in the cell, right? Like let's say this is your cell right here, right? And this is a very basic cell. They decided not to draw, the nucleus. They didn't put any of the other normal organelles in there, right? But you can see there's some mitochondria. We don't really care about that mitochondria for the most part right now. Glycolysis is just going to produce some ATP out of sugar in this gooey portion of the cell here, okay? And that liquid gooey portion of the cell is going to leave you with a little bit of energy. It's going to leave you with a little bit of ATP. But it's also going to have these byproducts, right? These byproducts in the form of like pyruvates and lactic acid. That's going to go into the mitochondria, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So when you look at a cell, right? If you look at just your classic animal cell, right? And here we go, right? Just a regular old boring cell. There's the nucleus. There's all these like other special organelles. And then these guys right here, these little they almost look like potato bugs. Those are your mitochondria. And then all of this space in between here, that's all fluid. All of your cells are very fluid. And so in that fluid is just this kind of wet, gooey mixture. This is where we produce glycolysis. This is where glycolysis takes place. It takes place in all the liquid, gooey portion of the cell. And what glycolysis is it's the process whereby your body is going to break down sugar, and I mean sugar, glucose, right? Glucose is the most natural, pure form of like sugar inside of our body. So when, you know, like I've got a piece of bread here, right? When I eat that complex bread, my digestive system is going to break it down into individual sugars. Those sugars are going to enter my bloodstream, and then that sugar is going to be used to produce ATP. And it's going to do it through glycolysis. This is also sometimes referred to as the lactic acid system. You'll sometimes hear people refer to it as that because the byproduct of producing ATP is going to leave you with some lactic acid. So your body's going to take sugar, it's going to break it into ATP, and then there's going to be this byproduct extra stuff that also gets produced. Now, Charlie, only because you're the newest guy here, I'm going to pick on you just a little bit. And, you know, hopefully this tips you off and warns you, the fact that I'm even asking. But let me ask you, is lactic acid a good thing or a bad thing? Uh-oh. Okay, we might have lost that mute button. All right, well, anyway.
What about
Oh,
elastic acid is the stuff that keeps your muscles sore.
well,
right?
it can make your muscles sore, yes. So Noel, what do you think? Good thing or a bad thing?
Good thing.
It is a good thing. Not that
'Cause
being sore is
no.
necessarily a good thing. Like being sore is not, you don't have to be sore to have had a good workout. Those are not, it feels like that's important, but that's, you know, being sore is not an important aspect of a good workout. But lactic acid is an incredibly good thing because we need it later on in our energy systems. We need it to do the next part of metabolism. So through the process of glycolysis, we're going to break down sugar. It's going to be used to produce ATP, but it's also going to produce some lactic acid. And that lactic acid is going to help us during this section of the metabolism here in just a second. So that's why it's incredibly important. Like a lot of times lactic acid is, you know, painted as the bad guy, but without it, without the production of lactic acid, it would be very, very difficult for us to do the next parts of our metabolism. So how long does glycolysis last? Well, it lasts, depending on who you ask, anywhere from 30 to 60 seconds. And so this is where we're going to have the lactic acid or glycolysis. Actually, no, I'm going to put glycolysis. Glycolysis or lactic acid system. Right? And like I said, that's going to last maybe 30 to 60 seconds, depending on who you ask, right? I guess that works just fine. We'll go like that. So that is going to be like right there. So our two anaerobic energy systems, the two that take place without any oxygen, they take place in the fluid portion of the cell, are the ATP-PC system and then the glycolysis, right? Now, once we continue, let's say we continue doing cardio, right? Or we continue lifting, right? So, you know, let's say my 1 rep max is 100 pounds and I decide to lift 50 pounds. That's 50% of my 1 rep max. I should be able to do at least 20 reps of that, right? So my 1 rep max is 100, I'm lifting 50. I should be able to do 20 reps of that. And let's say I'm doing it at a really slow tempo. I'm doing it at a 4-2-1 tempo, right? That means that my eccentric portion is 4 seconds, my isometric is 2 seconds, and my concentric is 1 second. That means that I am going to be under tension for 7 seconds per rep. And if I'm doing 20 reps, 7 times 20, that's going to be 140 seconds. That's basically 2 minutes, 2 minutes and 20 seconds worth of like to do this one set. It's going to take me 220. So I would start my first 15 seconds using my ATP-PC system. Then I would pass that energy production off to glycolysis for the next 30 to 60 seconds. And then I'm really going to start burning like crazy, and I'm going to start breathing a little bit harder. And when I start breathing harder, I'm now bringing in way more oxygen. And now I'm passing off that energy to my aerobic energy system. Noah, did you have a question? Noah, just so you know, your mic's unmuted. So I'm going to pass that off to my, what's that? Okay, never mind. So we're going to pass that off to our aerobic energy system, right? So our aerobic energy system is the long-term energy system, right? This is our endurance energy system. This is where we're going to start with what we call aerobic glycolysis. We don't talk about aerobic glycolysis all that often, but aerobic glycolysis is glycolysis that's actually taking place just on the other side of the mitochondria. It sort of acts as a stopgap to produce just a little bit more energy as it's sort of transferring between, like, you know, the fluid portion and like the cytoplasm there. So actually, when we're looking at this chart here, we have like this could be considered like aerobic glycolysis, right? And that's going to take place like in the gap between like these two, right? And actually, you know what I'll do? I'll put this 30 to 60 seconds. We'll put this like right here in the middle of the two. And that's really where that version of glycolysis is taking place. So once we're finished with aerobic glycolysis, now we're into our final energy system, which is going to be our aerobic or oxidative energy system, right? This is the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. Now, the Krebs cycle is going to use those byproducts that we talked about earlier. So remember, during glycolysis, we produced ATP, and we produced this byproduct of lactic acid. Well, that lactic acid is going to go through the Krebs cycle, and the Krebs cycle is sometimes known as the citric acid cycle. And what that's going to do is that's going to produce ATP. Now, this is taking place, remember, this is taking place in the mitochondria. Like before, this was all taking place outside of our cell. I'm sorry, inside of our cell, but outside of the mitochondria. It was taking in the fluid. Now, energy production is going to transfer inside here. And before, remember, this fluid portion was really liquidy. So because it's all fluid, there's no oxygen present on this portion of the cell. But if our body carries some oxygen molecules into the mitochondria, now we've got some oxygen in here, we've got some air in here, and we can use that air along with lactic acid to produce a whole bunch of energy, right? And that's what's going to happen in the Krebs cycle. So what's going to happen now is we're going to pass into the mitochondria, and we're going to create ATP by using the byproducts of our glycolysis. We're going to create, we're going to use oxygen and lactic acid in order to produce ATP. And we're going to be left with a byproduct here as well, which is going to be like CO2. You know, we're going to be left with a little bit of carbon dioxide. This is why you inhale oxygen and exhale CO2. So if we look at that, right, this is now going to be our oxidative metabolism, which is going to consist of two different sections here. This is going to really going to be, it's going to kind of break down again into the, I guess I need to do it. Why is this so difficult? This is going to break down into the Krebs cycle, which is here. I'm going to delete this arrow. Doing this on Paint, I just should be using freaking Photoshop. It'd be a lot easier. So it's going to break down into the Krebs cycle, and it's going to break down into what's called the electron transport chain. So these are our final two sections of the oxidative metabolism. Now the Krebs cycle, and these take place pretty much simultaneously. Like there's really no way, like we teach it in this order as if it goes like Krebs cycle, electron transport chain. And theoretically, like, yeah, this does take place first because this is also going to have some byproducts, and then those byproducts are going to get used in here. But like there's a big difference between, you know, how to use one and how to use the other. Your Krebs cycle is going to use the byproducts of glycolysis. So it's going to use lactic acid, and that lactic acid is going to go through this really complex cycle. What if you look at the Krebs cycle, it looks like this, right? So this is your Krebs cycle right here. It's where a little bit of that lactic acid gets broken down into what is called acetyl-CoA. Don't worry about that. And it's going to go through this really big complex chain here. And it's going to split off a little bit of ATP. So you're going to be left with some new ATP. We're producing it on the go here. But you're also left with a whole bunch of this stuff. See this stuff right here is called NAD and FAD. So NAD and FAD, all this stuff that kind of gets cleaved off a bunch of times, that's a byproduct, right? And so now that byproduct is going to further go through our aerobic metabolism and end up in the electron transport chain. And the electron transport chain is going to be the final part of our metabolism here. And this all, by the way, is all taking place for like 2 minutes or greater, right? So 5 to 15 seconds, we were in the ATP-PC system. 30 to 60 seconds, we were in glycolysis. And now this is going to be 2 minutes into infinity, right? This is basically going to go as long as you can in terms of like how long you can be in this energy system. This is why we are able to like run marathons, right? Is because like this part of the energy system basically lasts forever, right? So that is sort of how our energy system works, right? We create ATP in the mitochondria using the byproducts of the Krebs cycle. This creates CO2 and water as a byproduct, and it uses oxygen as a fuel source, right? So let's go all the way back through this one more time. Charlie, are you with us? Noel, are you with us? Charlie and Noel, can you guys hear me? Oh.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, right there. Charlie, are you able to hear me? If you're having trouble with the mute feature, if you get a thumbs up, you can always click the emoji thing. Okay. So let's look at what I mean here, right? So we're going to start in the ATP-PC system. This is going to use any stored creatine that you have in your body, right? And you're going to break off a molecule of ATP. You're going to use that creatine to reattach it. Break it off, reattach it, break it off, reattach it. Releases a whole bunch of energy, but it only lasts about 15 seconds. If you continue doing work, which in this case we are, for the next 30 to 60 seconds, you're going to be in glycolysis. So your body's going to start to produce a little bit of lactic acid as a byproduct. You've experienced this, you know, when you first start going for a run and you, about a minute in, you start to get that like goo in your, like, you know, like you start to kind of feel a little bit of the burn. It feels a little bit tough. And there's like this almost like a little mental wall to kind of, that you have to kind of push through past that first minute. Well, that's where glycolysis is really starting to kick off. And you're getting this sort of like lactic acid to start getting produced in the background, right? And don't forget, glycolysis is always taking place in the background underneath all of these cycles, right? Like at all times, glycolysis is still occurring. It's just occurring in the background. And so now we're producing ATP on the go, but we're also producing a bunch of lactic acid. And now that lactic acid, which is acting as like a byproduct here, is going to go through the Krebs cycle. And now, once you add lactic acid plus oxygen into the mitochondria, that's going to spit off a little bit more ATP, but you're also going to get a whole bunch of NAD and FAD, these little high energy molecules. That NAD and FAD are going to add even more oxygen, and they're going to go through the electron transport chain to produce a whopping 32 ATP, which, by the way, During the ATP-PC system, we weren't really producing ATP. We were just reconstituting it. During glycolysis, for every molecule of glucose, we were getting 2 molecules of ATP. During the Krebs cycle, for every molecule of glucose, we were getting 2 more molecules of ATP. During the electron transport chain, we were getting somewhere around 28 to 32. That's way, way more. And that's why during long duration work, which even includes like you sitting right now, you're in the aerobic energy system because you've been up and awake for greater than 2 minutes today, right? So you're in this electron transport chain producing lots and lots and lots of ATP using oxygen. And that's why we continue to breathe every single day, all day long, right? Now, that's great for producing lots of ATP, but it's not so great for being able to lift really heavy. So when it comes to doing cardio, this is your low intensity, high duration work. This is anytime you hit 2 minutes or longer, you are in your aerobic metabolism. You are relying on the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. You're using the byproducts of the anaerobic metabolism, using the byproducts of glycolysis, and oxygen in order to like produce lots of ATP. So when we're talking about cardio, we are talking about being under tension for an extremely long period of time. Therefore, we are training our aerobic energy system. But that doesn't mean that you can't tap into those other energy systems as well. Remember, this is low intensity, gentle, long duration work, right? Aerobic metabolism is high intensity, short duration work, right? So we start here, and as time continues to move, we work our way through these other energy systems. Does anybody have any questions on that?
I do.
Yeah, what's up?
I know I've heard this before, but I was always kind of confused. So when we're resting, we're always in the aerobic energy, in the electric transport chain, right?
Yeah, this seems a little confusing, right? Because like,
and then
go ahead.
And then you said we tap into it, let's say when we go and then we're first starting off our very first set at the gym, then we're tapping into ATP PC.
Right. Because what is happening is you're going to be recruiting new muscle fibers and new muscle cells that were previously not doing any work. So your cells were sitting around like, you were using some muscle to like open doors and, walk around and stuff like that, but you weren't using all of your muscle fibers, right? Remember yesterday we talked about like the number of muscle fibers you recruit. It determines like how many muscle fiber, like determines, how strong your contraction is. So when you go do a strong contraction, even if it's like jogging, that's a more powerful contraction than walking, right? When you start to do that, you are recruiting more muscle fibers. So those muscle fibers are going to start in the ATP-PC system, go into glycolysis until eventually they've also been working for a long duration of time. Does that make sense, Robert?
Yeah, so it's when we decide to start using more muscle fibers, those muscle fibers have to go into the ATP and then they start at the beginning.
Nailed it. Yep.
Oh, okay, I see. But for the most part, though, when we're resting, we are in the aerobic.
Yes, you are recovering in your aerobic energy system. That's why, and by the way, and this starts to make a lot of sense if you consider, like, think about the last time you did like a sprint where you got out of breath, right? You started recruiting like maximal muscle fibers, right? Because you're sprinting, that's about as much effort as you can get, right? So you're recruiting as many muscle fibers. Now all those muscle fibers are getting exhausted. And eventually, by the way, there is something that happens where you start to produce so much lactic acid and there's so much hydrogen in the area that your muscle cells are like, we can't do this anymore. Like, we're tapped out. We're only bringing in this much oxygen, but we're making this much lactic acid, right? And so what ends up happening is you have too much lactic acid for your body to process with the amount of oxygen that you're bringing in. You've only got so many red blood cells. You've only got so much mitochondria. So what ends up happening is after a while, you can't produce any more ATP out of that lactic acid. So it just gets sitting around, At first you were generating 10 ATP, and you were bringing in 10 units of oxygen. And so that 10 got burnt up. But now you're producing 20 ATP, and the most oxygen you can like bring in, depending on how many red blood cells you have, how much hemoglobin you have, how many mitochondria you have, you can only process 10 units of that lactic acid. So half of it got burnt up for energy, but the other half was just laying around. And so it starts to burn. And so you're sprinting and you're sprinting and you're like, oh God, I'm gonna die. You know, like, and you're like, ah, and it starts to burn and it starts to get crazy. And eventually you have to slow down. And then when you slow down, what do? You don't go, wow, man, that was hard. You know, like that's not how that works. Like when you're done with a sprint, you're like, like you're breathing like crazy, right? And that crazy breathing that's happening there is all of the oxygen coming in. It's processing all that lactic acid that's laying around, you know? Yeah, you're not producing any more lactic acid, thank God, right? You're done with your sprint. But you are processing all the stuff you produced previously. And that's why you are still out of breath after your set's over. If it didn't work that way, if we didn't recover in the aerobic energy system, we would never have to like stop in general. We would just be able to keep going infinitely. We would literally be machines. Does that make sense, Robert?
Yeah, I guess I always had my issue on like, I mean, it's not like we wake up and we're starting exercise right when we wake up, you know? So that's why I was always wondering like, where do we start? But we always start in the aerobic, and then we tap into it, and then we recover again in the aerobic.
Perfect. I will say I do have to ruin it a little bit though, because I've heard people say the same thing, and I was the same way, where I was like, where does it start though? You know, we live in a world where everything is pretty linear. You know, you're born, you live, you die. You know, I wake up from my house, I go to work, and I go back to my house. Like we start reading a book, there's the end of the book. Things tend to kind of move in a straight line and so like that's kind of how our brain understands a lot of things. So the understanding I just gave you, if it really helps, keep it. I will say this, and this kind of ruins it. All of this stuff is actually taking place you know, there really is no perfect starting point. I know that like I drew this chart here where it starts and then it finishes, right? That's not 100% accurate in terms like, you know, like which energy system are you in right now? Robert, are you standing right now? Are you standing around?
No, I'm eating some oatmeal right now.
Okay, so you're sitting. That's pretty low intensity, right? The only lower you could get with that intensity is if you were to lay down, and the only lower than that is if you start to fall asleep. And when you are asleep, that's the only time where you are perfectly only anaerobic. It's the only time in day. But like while you're up right now, like some of your muscles, they're, you know, going through the glycolysis section, and some of them are going through ATP-PC, but then they get tapped out, you know. All of it is sort of taking place simultaneously in reality. But in terms of how we study this stuff, in terms of our understanding of what it is and how it really works, just think of it in this nice straight line. It's a much clearer, easier way to understand it. But I do want to give you the real answer, which is like technically all of it's taking place simultaneously.
I got you. So it, yeah, you kind of confused me again, but I think
then forget what I said.
No. I get you. Some of our muscle fibers are in glycolysis. Yeah. When we choose to tap into using more muscle fibers, those go into the ATP, PC, and then glycolysis.
Exactly, right? Like when you start going upstairs.
Right. So they're all of our muscle fibers are all in different areas right now.
Perfect. Yep.
I got you.
Yeah. I just want to be like truthful, even at the sacrifice of clear sometimes, you know. It's kind of like the way they teach, like I remember learning this in school, where it was like, hey, you know how we taught you what gravity is when you were a little kid? That's not what gravity is. I was like, what? You know, like I always thought like gravity is stuff falling, you know, it's the force of stuff downwards. It's like, that's not actually accurate. It's the attraction between, you know, mass. Stuff with mass is attracted to other stuff. And it just happens to be that the earth is full of mass, so it pulls towards it. So it feels like it's pulling down, but that's not actually what's happening. And my brain was like, you know. We teach things simplistically, you know, to order to understand the concepts at first, and then the truth is often much more complicated. Okay, so talking about cardio training, one of the things that's really cool, and the reasons we call this conditioning, is because if we do want to teach ourselves how to utilize all of these energy systems, I don't want to get good at one energy system. I want to get good at all energy systems. And that's where interval training comes in. Interval training is all about moving through different energy systems, right? We sprint for a little bit, that drops us into these intense energy systems here, and then we recover, you know, in this gentle energy system here, right? So that's going to minimize your lactic acid production while enhancing your lactic acid removal. You're going to teach your body how to get better at pulling that lactic acid out of your bloodstream so that it doesn't make you sick, so that it doesn't continue to make you burn. You're going to enhance your ability to deal with this lactic acid. Meanwhile, because it's doing intense cardio and you're getting to high percentages of your maximum heart rate, you're going to enhance how much your body utilizes oxygen. Your body's going to go, holy crap, I need to use oxygen better. So it's going to produce more hemoglobin. It's going to produce more mitochondria. It's going to make you better at cardiovascular exercise in general. And this is why interval training, HIIT training, is so popular nowadays, because you're getting two benefits. It's going to make you better at your strength training, which sounds surprising. I know, you know, bodybuilders would, you know, start crying if they heard me say that cardio makes you a better strength training athlete, but it does if you do it the right way. Interval training is very, very good because it enhances your ability to deal with lactic acid. So now if you go do like a heavy lift day and you're producing lots of lactic acid, you could either get nauseous or you could deal with it. And if you do a lot of cardio interval wise, where you're doing intense sprinting and recovering, you are used to producing lactic acid, you'll probably be able to deal with it better. And that's why, like, we do medium intensity interval training for clients in the strength level of the OPT, which we're going to see in just a little bit. So now, you know, when I'm talking about this intensity stuff, by the way, when I say high intensity versus low intensity, you know, it's just like lifting. High intensity is 85% of my 1 rep max. You know, if I can lift 100 pounds and I decide to lift 85 pounds, that's 85% of my 1 rep max. That's high intensity, right? 100% of my 1 rep max, that's as high intensity as I can possibly get. So it depends on like which energy system you're training. The same thing is true for your heart rate, right? You have got gentle cardiovascular training and you've got intense cardiovascular training, right? And so I could be at 65% of my heart rate max, or I could be at 95% of my heart rate max. Now, how do I figure out what my heart rate max is? Well, that's where these different formulas come in. So you have your traditional heart rate max formula, which is 220 minus your age, right? And that's going to be your heart rate max. So if I was being really simple about it, actually, I'm going to go to that calculator I went to yesterday. Carbonate calculator. Let's say it's me, right? I'm 32 years old. My resting heart rate was 59 beats the last time I checked it. So my max heart rate's 188 because my max heart rate is going to be calculated by subtracting 220 minus our age, right? We talked about that in the assessments class. Now, if I wanted to, by the way, I could use the regression formula as well. Instead of 220 minus your age, it's 208 minus 70% of your age. Either way, it's they're both figuring out your heart rate max. For somebody like me, that number is pretty close anyways. But that's general, right? Like that's not taking into account, like, so my heart rate zones would be like 122 to 141, right? Let's just open another one. Original heart rate. Original target heart rate. So we'd have like 65 to 75%, right? That would be for me, let's see here, 122 to 141. All right, so 122, 141, 76 to 85% would be 141 to 160. and 86 to 95%, that would be 160 to 179, right? So that's not bad, right? That's my zone 1, my zone 2, and my zone 3, right? And I don't dislike it. I think it's okay, right? If I have nothing else to use, I'll use something like this and then use that to like gauge my intensity, right? So that's our original formula, right? But this means that every 32-year-old on the planet is going to get these target heart rate zones. But we know that some people are in different shape than others. So now we've got our Carvenin target heart rate zones. And the Carvenin target heart rate zones are going to be very, very different. You know, that's going to be where I look at instead, my zone 1 is going to be, it's still 65 to 75% of my heart rate, but now it's going to be 143 up to 156, right? And my zone 2, which is 76 to 85%, right? That's going to be 143 up to, 156. 156 up to 169. And then I've got my zone 3, which is 86 to 95% of my heart rate max. That's going to be 175, that's not true, 169 up to 182. So we can see very different targets here, right? These different targets are giving me different workouts. So maybe I would do interval training where I would work really hard in zone 3 and recover gently in zone 1. And then I would repeat over and over and over and over and over again. That is going to be my interval training, right? So that's why we like the Carvenin formula. And you guys will remember the Carvenin formula from our assessments class. It's your max heart rate, so 220 minus your age. You subtract your resting heart rate. For me, that'd be 59. Multiply it by your desired intensity. So that's either going to be, 65, 75, 85, 95, whatever percentage you need it to be. You're going to multiply that percentage, and then you're going to tack that resting heart rate back on at the end, right? So you're going to add that resting heart rate. That's going to give you a new target heart rate. And that's going to narrow down those ranges to give you a specific range to hit. So if you were assigning me a cardio routine, you would say, all right, I want you to work between zone 3 and zone 1. We're going to do some high intensity interval training. I want you to be in zone 3 for 30 seconds, and I want you to recover in zone 1 for 60 seconds. So you do a 1-to-2 work to rest ratio. Twice the amount of rest for half the amount of work, right? So 30 seconds of zone 3. So, like when I'm wearing my heart rate monitor, I'm going to sprint. I'm going to try and get my heart rate somewhere between 169 and 182. And then I'm going to turn around and walk back down the hill and hopefully get my heart rate down to 143, somewhere between 143 and 156. And that's going to be my overall goal for the day. That's going to be my high intensity interval training. And that's a much more specific version than when you go to like Orange Theory, or not Orange Theory, but when you go to like a cardio routine, they're like sprint, recover, sprint, recover. Your definition of a sprint and my definition of a sprint could be totally different things. But if I tell you, your 169 and my 169, it's the same number, right? There's no interpretation there. So when someone says like, that was hard, I'm like, what do you mean by hard? Do you mean intense? Do you mean, like that is left to interpretation. Using specific heart rate training zones takes the interpretation out of the equation, they have to do it specifically. Now, one of the reasons we're talking about all this, and we've been talking about like oxygen consumption and stuff, is we have to understand what is called your respiratory quotient. What your respiratory quotient is, remember, you're bringing in oxygen, your cells are using that oxygen, and you're spitting out CO2. So it's the amount of carbon dioxide expired versus the amount of oxygen consumed. We're going to use a fake number here. Let's say I bring in 100 units of oxygen and I exhale 70 units of CO2. I brought in 100 oxygen, exhaled 70 CO2, which means that I burned up 70 oxygen units, but 30 of those oxygen units I totally didn't use. 30 of them I didn't even process, right? They came in and I said, this is why CPR works, by the way. Because remember, like sometimes, I remember the first time I ever went in, like when they talked about CPR in like high school, I remember having this thought. And it was like, why does CPR work? Like if you're breathing into someone's mouth, aren't we exhaling carbon dioxide? And like we're supposed to, you know, we're trying to keep the brain alive with oxygen. If we're exhaling carbon dioxide, why do we even breathe in? Shouldn't we just like find a way to get oxygen? And the person explained, they're like, yeah, good point, but you're exhaling some oxygen, and that little bit of oxygen is just enough, hopefully, you know, to keep their brain alive. But if you were to sprint and then give someone CPR and you were out of breath, you're burning up all the oxygen. So that means you're exhaling only CO2, which means CPR is not going to really, you know, breathing into that person is not going to help. That's actually why they tell you if there's a second person present and you're able to do CPR, you should switch and do it, and then the next person should do it, and then that gives you time to rest, and each of those persons, they're not going to get out of breath, which means they'll have more oxygen to give. Fun, weird fact. So that's your respiratory quotient, right? It's the amount of CO2 exhaled divided by the oxygen you are consuming. So this is another method for determining your training zones. Like if we use like your VO2 max, for instance, we're measuring the maximum volume of oxygen consumed, right? So here's the thing. When I look at this zone right here, right? If I'm in zone 1, right? And I'm just going to look at the zones in general. So respiratory quotient here, right? We've got zone 1, which again is 65 to 75% heart rate max. Zone 2, which is 86 to 95% heart rate max, and zone 3, which is 9. Oh, I totally screwed that up. Sorry, that's supposed to be 76 to 85. 86 to 95% heart rate max. Right. So there's our zones here. What that means is zone 1 is an RQ of 0.8 to 0.9. So what I mean when I say that, right, when I say an RQ of 0.8 to 0.9, what I mean is that you are consuming a lot of oxygen, but not all of it's getting used, right? Some of it is being exhaled because again, I said it earlier, but you've only got so many red blood cells, you've only got so much mitochondria, you've only got, so much hemoglobin to carry that oxygen. And so if you're consuming 90% of the oxygen you're bringing in, 90% of it, but 10% of it's going away, you're still in zone 1. You're still in a low intensity version here. Then we've got zone 2, which is an RQ of 0.9 up to 1.0. So if you're at an RQ of 1.0, that means that you brought in 100 units of oxygen and you exhaled 100 units of CO2. That means that you burned all of the oxygen up. You used all of it for fuel. So because you used all of it for fuel, you know, the only thing coming out is carbon dioxide. And then we see this zone 3 here, and this is kind of an oxymoron, but it says this is an RQ, zone 3, right, which is our super intense zone. This is an RQ of greater than 1.0. Now, how the hell can you consume more than 100% oxygen? You really can't. But what they mean when they say it's greater than 1.0, it just means that literally you are without oxygen. Like you need 500 units of oxygen, but you're only capable of bringing in 499 units, right? So you need 500, which means you cannot keep up zone 3 for a substantial period of time. It's impossible, right? No one can maintain an RQ of 1.0 because you are consuming all the oxygen, right? And that means that there's always a little bit of like lactic acid left over after every round of like producing ATP. So that lactic acid starts building up and building up and building up. And now your body is filling with it. And because of that, you are starting to get more and more and more tired because you're starting to, you know, your muscles are starting to burn. So we really love these target heart rate zones. They're the best way for us to write a really effective cardiovascular routine because we are conditioning our clients through different phases. So your stage 1 is very much the fat burning zone. That's your RQ of 0.8 to 0.9. Your stage 2 is your medium to high intensity zone. And your stage 3 is your maximal intensity conditioning zone. Now, one last thing I want to talk about before we move past this. One of the biggest benefits to to interval training, obviously we know that it increases the number of calories burned because you're going to tap into zone 3, which means you're going to be burning lots of calories because that is real hard. It's also not very monotonous. It's way more fun than your traditional style of cardio, and it increases your metabolic rate. It makes your metabolism faster. Kind of. Again, it doesn't necessarily just make your metabolism like faster overall, but it does mean that you actually burn calories overall. This is my favorite concept when it comes to working out, but there's this concept called EPOC, excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. So it means extra after exercise O2 consumption. You are literally going to burn more calories after you leave the gym because of the intense workout that you did. Remember, you left all this extra lactic acid laying around. You left all this like stuff laying around that your body has to process, even though your workout's over. And so over the next 72 hours, your body is going to be processing all of this intense work that you did, depending on how hard it is. So the harder you work, the more excess exercise, the more excess oxygen consumption you're going to create. Your body's going to continue to burn extra calories, sometimes up to 3 days. Now, when it comes to writing so that's all of our anatomy and physiology. Now, when it comes to writing a cardio program, it's a little bit of a different perspective with athletes. Obviously, everything has been. But you're going to start with your base training. That's your foundation, right? You always want to build your foundation first. Then you start to introduce a little bit of interval training. Then with athletes, we're going to kind of combine some of this cardio with some of our SAQ concepts. We can start to get into linear sprinting before eventually getting into multi-directional sprinting, before eventually getting into sports-specific sprinting. So I would start, let's say I've got a person who wants to become like the world's greatest soccer player. They've never played soccer a day in their life. I've actually always considered doing this with myself because I don't play soccer, but I am a cardio athlete. And it's like, I wonder how good I could get at soccer in like 30 days, you know, like after never having played it before. But you start with your base training, where you build up your endurance. So you go for general jogging, right? Then you start to introduce interval training. You start to do some level 1 to level 2 training, or zone 1 to zone 2 training. Maybe then you get pretty good at that. So you start to go zone 1, 2, and 3 training, right? That's your interval training. Then we start to get into some linear sprinting. So we start to work on speed. So it's like, all right, I want you to sprint this 40, sprint this 40. It should be super, super, super intense. And then we give them like certain bits of recovery, right? Or maybe it's like a 300-yard shuttle, right? Then we start to get into some multi-directional training where it's like, now you're going to do a sprint, but you're also going to hit that cone and start changing directions. So now it's like sprint plus maybe go through like an obstacle course, right? Directional change. Then eventually it's like you have to take it, sprint, go through that directional course, but you also have to dribble a soccer ball while you're doing it. And dribbling that soccer ball is a lot of quickness training. So you get your speed, agility, and quickness, right? And we started with our foundation, built on the intervals, then we incorporated SAQ into that cardio. So when it comes to base training, this is what you build in the off season. You really don't want to dedicate part of the season to base training. This should be done. Maybe around, it says 1 to 7. A lot of people recommend 8. 2 months. 2 months of just steady state cardio using zones 1 and 2, medium intervals, but like generally you should be able to maintain this for a long duration. It looks something kind of like this, by the way. This is a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio. You can see it's 3 minutes on, 3 minutes off. The working and the resting are even with each other. This is a great base program, by the way. I actually really like this program. So you have day 1 and day 2. You have a zone 1 day and a stage 1 day and a stage 2 day. You'll notice this is different, by the way, for those of you who have been through program design. Normally with phase 1 clients, we don't do stage 2. But remember, these are athletes, and so this is a very different perspective. So they would do zone 1, and on day 2, they would do zone 2. Now, for the purposes of your regular textbook, you guys know me, I got to show you the regular version. So if a client is in the stabilization phase, right, we look at the OPT model, they're in stabilization, right? That means that they are at the bottom. We are really only going to focus on stage 1 cardiorespiratory training. So you've got your stages, you've got your zones, right? Stage 1, just like corrective flexibility consisted of SMR and static stretches, stage 1 cardio consists of zone 1. You're never going to go above 75% of your heart rate. You're basically, this is your cardio base. You can think of this as the fat burning zone or your recovery zone. So if you were to write like a cardio routine for someone, let's say they're doing strength training Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Their cardio would be zone 1 on Tuesday, zone 2 on Thursday, zone 3 on Saturday. 65 to 75% of your heart rate max for maybe 30 minutes at a pop, all 3 days per week. Really, 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 really simple. Then our client gets a little bit more advanced and they move into like phase 2. Now, if they're an athlete, you can see we start to incorporate zone 3 here. But that's not necessarily, well, I should say. So if they're getting into like the intense interval training, you can see they have day 1, which is a steady state day. Day 2, which is that alternating between, you know, anaerobic and aerobic day. And then day 3, which is like they're getting into like that zone 3, right? So 1 minute here, 1 minute here, 1 minute here. That's another 1-to-1 work to rest ratio. This is brutal, by the way. You can do that for maybe 5 to 6 minutes. So 86 to 95% of your heart rate max down, you know, 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute, then recover for 2 to 3 minutes and repeat. So that's a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8. Yeah, 13 minutes and then recover again. Probably repeat that for about 30 minutes. That is, by the way, this is a super peak. I will do this maybe once or twice a year. This is brutal. It's really, really tough training. But that's your peaking. I want to look at it from the regular cardio perspective. I want to talk about a normal client. Normal clients, you're going to start to incorporate zone 2. So zone 2, again, 76 to 85% of your heart rate max, right? This is for increasing your conditioning, but you are going to recover in zone 1. So you'll see here, stage 1 consists of zone 1. Stage 2 consists of zone 2 and zone 1 because you recover in zone 1. So maybe on day, you know, you're strength training Monday, Wednesday, Friday still, but then on Tuesday you do a zone 2 workout, Thursday you do a zone 1 workout, Saturday you do a zone 2 workout. Next week you switch it. So it goes zone 2, zone 1, zone 2. Next week it goes zone 1, zone 2, zone 1. And you just alternate back and forth between the 2. Meanwhile, their strength workouts are the same. Finally, we got that zone 3 stuff. Zone 3 stuff is where we are getting into peak training, right? So that's going to use zone 3, 2, and 1. We're incorporating all 3 zones. You're making sure that you are doing more work than you can recover from on the go, which means you have to slow down if you want to recover. That's great. That's why I always tell people, like, don't think of it like I'll give my clients like cardio to do between sets all the time. And I'm like, don't think of it as like, you're going to go do this set and then you got to go do cardio for 2 minutes to like burn some time. Think of it as like, how do I get out of breath in this 2 minutes? How do I work as hard as possible in 2 minutes, right? So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, that's strength on workout, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then zone 3 on Tuesday, zone 2 on Thursday, zone 1 on Saturday. If you want to flip those around, you can. It doesn't really matter what order you do them in. We just want to make sure that we're having alternating between the days. So obviously, whenever you're doing cardio, it's important for you to make sure that you are avoiding overtraining. You do not want to do too much cardio, right? So if your client feels drained, they start to, they're sore, but they're not recovering. They don't feel refreshed after they're done working out. They have a hard time sleeping, actually. That means that their body is creating so much stress because you are overtraining. You need to, calm down the workouts. Avoid that zone 3 stuff for a while, drop down into zone 1, reduce your duration for a little while, maybe take them into stabilization phase, give them a little bit of rest. And then when it comes to like determining your starting points, just like any other routine, we're going to base it on our score. If you do the Harvard step test, the YMCA 3-minute step test, they do super, super well. Well, maybe use phase 1 for a couple weeks, but then once they're crushing it, right, you can get them into that phase 2 and phase 3. So that is cardio. Do you guys have any questions on that?
I have a quick question on that last part that you just said.
Yeah.
With overtraining someone in zone 3, what if we're working with like a athlete who's got games, every other day or something like that? And they're either like a soccer player or a basketball player where they do a lot of running, obviously they're going to be in zone 3 because they're going to be going their hardest.
Yeah.
Do we not do cardio with them when they come to us? Do we just let their cardio be their games, or?
So that's their sport specific stuff, right? Like if they're doing like a scrimmage, right? That's sport specific cardio. But there are days where it's like, some scrimmages is like you're working on specific drills. Other days you're working on conditioning, if we're talking, it depends on like what part of the season you're talking about, like
I guess I'm going, I'm sorry. I guess I'm going like more of like in season.
Yeah. If you're in season, like LeBron's not going to go for like a run mid season. You know what I mean? He may, like a gentle one, but it's not going to be like a workout, right? That's why when it comes to like training athletes, for the most part, in season, you're really just focusing on corrective flexibility. It would be a tragedy if you're in the middle of the season and you pulled a muscle in the weight room. You're not doing maximum intensity. Your highest part of the year, and we're going to get into this when we do periodization, but your peaking part of the year, your most intense stuff, is just before the season starts. You want your athletes to peak right as the season's beginning. You are not training LeBron to increase his bench press in the middle of the playoffs. You know what I mean? He should have increased his bench press right before the season started. Same thing with sprinting or cardio. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think what it is, a kettlebell can give you that core strength to give you that power to that dunk that you need. You know what I mean?
Well, we're about to talk about core stuff, so let's find out. So we're going to dive into chapter 6 here. This is your core training concepts, right? Noel, you gave me the greatest segue. I was like, this is a perfect transition. I'm going to steal that. So we're going to talk about core training and its relationship to performance. We know that the core is incredibly important. We do want to understand our different core systems, and then obviously how to write an effective core training program. So when I say the core, everybody right now, remember, I do not mean abs. The abs are a part of your core. They are not the core, right? Your core is your entire lumbopelvic hip complex, right? So the core, the entire lumbopelvic hip complex, it's your stabilizing muscles that hold your spine in place. It's your moving muscles that move your pelvis and your spine. And it's the muscles that attach your pelvis to your arms and legs, allowing you to move all of that. Your lats are part of your core. And we think of them as an upper back muscle, but they're part of your core. An efficient core should be able to accelerate, decelerate, and stabilize. The problem that we generally see people have Most people have a really strong movement system. They're really good at moving their spine, and they're not so good at stabilizing their spine. This is a problem that I have. I really struggle with this because I focus a lot on the big flashy mover exercises and don't focus enough on stabilization sometimes. A proper core training program should focus on stabilization, so stability, endurance, and then obviously, yeah, strength and power as well. But we build on a foundation of stability, right? We need to hold our spine in place before we try to move our spine around. I want you to be better at planking before you get better at crunching. And I want you to be good at crunching before you get better at throwing, right? It's all progressive. Remember integrated training, right? It's progressive, it's systematic. We progress in a designed, specific, scientifically sound way. So a lot of our people have like a weak core. That weak core leads to injuries. Lord knows it happened to me. Core training is going to enhance your sports performance because the stronger core you have, the more effectively you're going to be able to move. It's going to put your entire body in, you know, the alignment that it's supposed to be in, right? We call that a biomechanically advantageous position. Just means good posture, right? I am able to be more athletic when I'm in good posture. So if that's the case, I need to hold myself in that good posture. So a lot of times when we talk about stabilization, we're actually talking more about like minimizing movement more than we're talking about movement, right? Like a lot of people think like exercise is all about movement, and it is. Well, it's not all about movement. It's some about movement, right? But it's also about holding your body in proper alignment. So we've got a couple different categories of core musculature here. We talked about this in PFT 101, but you got three systems of the lumbopelvic hip complex, three systems of the core, right? You get your local stabilization system. And listen to the words that are in that sentence, right? It's local, which means it's close to home. So, you know, what's the closest like center of your body? Your spine, right? That's running right through the middle of you. And then it's all about stabilization. So it's all about the local stabilization system is all about holding your spine in place. So these are muscles that attach and stabilize your vertebrae. Their job is to provide intervertebral stability, holds all your discs in place. It aids in proprioception. This gives your body the ability to understand where it is in space. And the muscles that are in this section are going to be your transverse abdominis, multifidus, internal obliques, pelvic floor muscles, and diaphragm. So think of it as like a box holding your spine in place, right? You've got the front of the box, you've got the back of the box, that's your transverse abdominis, that's your multifidus. You've got your internal obliques on both sides of the box, right? They're holding the sides. You get your pelvic floor muscles, and you've got your diaphragm. And all of that is going to create stability. It's, you know, boxes hold stuff. Well, this holds your spine in place, right? That's the local stabilization system. So this is about resisting movement rather than movement, right? Planks are about resisting your hips dropping to the ground, right? A floor bridge is about resisting your hips dropping to the ground. A Superman is about resisting your arms and legs dropping to the ground, right? You're resisting movement. A bird dog, same concept. Those are that's our local stabilization system. Then we've got our global stabilization system. These are the muscles that kind of surround, they're on the outside layers, right? These are muscles that attach your spine to your pelvis. So when I look at my like rectus abdominis, right? You know, that is attaching like this upper part of like my rib cage down to the bottom part of my pelvis. So that's going to move, that's going to wrench this down this way and this up this way. And that's going to create spinal flexion, right? So my rectus abdominis is going to move my spine. This transfers loads from the upper and lower extremities and does a little bit of stabilizing during movement. But you want to think of your global stabilization system as your movers, right, for your spine. So the local stabilization holds your spine in place. The global stabilization system moves your spine. Same thing with like your external obliques, right? They're on the outside right here, moving you side to side and twisting, right? Let's take a look at your erector spinae, right? That's moving your spine into spinal extension. So again, attaching your pelvis to your spine here. So that's going to move us in different directions. Then we want to attach our pelvis to like our arms and legs, right? And that's where your movement system comes in, right? This is what people really have, like usually have a strong system. Most people have like a strong movement system and they can't stabilize for heck. But these are the muscles that attach your spine and your pelvis to the different parts of your extremities. So your gluteus maximus, your rectus femoris, your hip flexor complex, your hamstrings, even your lats, right? That's part of like your core's movement system. I'm never gonna get a picture. Oh, I did get a picture. Nice. I was like, this is gonna pull up some car or something. You know, these are things, like I said, latissimus dorsi, right? That's moving my arms, right? And creating a little spinal extension. My hip flexors, right? That's moving my femur, right? My hamstring complex, my quadriceps, all the hip muscles, adductors, right? Abductors, all of those are part of the movement system. And it's great that we have a strong movement system. You know, I'm really glad that I'm able to like move around the globe, but man, if I can't hold my spine in place, what good is it? You know, it's like you could have like, it's like having really great tires on your car, but you didn't put the lug nuts on. You know, like those are some really nice wheels. And it's like, yeah, well, we'll see how long they stay attached. You know? That's sort of what it's like. It's like you got really good tools to move around, but you didn't get the good tools to kind of stabilize everything. So we really want to focus on this local and global stabilization system. We like a lot of like core work in particular when it comes to stabilizing and holding our spine in place. Then we can focus on moving at rapid, you know, maximum velocities. So what are our core stabilization mechanisms? Well, one of the biggest ones is you're going to use intra-abdominal pressure. That's your transverse abdominis. If we look at the transverse abdominis, it's this webbing, right? It's this webbing that kind of, actually, this is great. There's your, oh my God, where's this picture been all my life? You can see here, this is your entire like local stabilization system. You can see all your multifidus holding each, look at all these little tiny, that's one thing, by the way, your multifidus is not really one muscle. Technically, it's your multifidi. This is plural because each one of these is almost its own little separate muscle. But it's holding all of your discs in place in the back, right? That's creating pressure this way. Meanwhile, the transverse abdominis is creating pressure this way. The internal obliques, which they're not really labeling here, but it would be this section of the fibers here, that's creating pressure this way. And then your diaphragm and pelvic floor muscles are creating upward and downward pressure. So, you know, it's creating, it's like a pressurized can almost, you know, and it's creating all this pressure designed to keep your discs held where they're at, as well as all your vital organs. So we're really thankful for that. We've also got a little bit of thoracolumbar stabilization in your global stabilization system here. So when we look at like our thoracolumbar fascia, that's all of this fascia at the bottom of the low back, right? It's all this stuff right here, creating a little bit more pressure in the back, and then also holding, you know, attaching our lats and creating some intra-abdominal pressure there as well. So all of that is going to hold, you know, create pressure to hold our discs where we want to hold our discs. Now, we want to make sure that we keep all that strong because guess what, guys? Low back pain is I mean, I've said this before, lateral ankle sprains are the most common sports-related injury. Low back pain is the most common injury on planet Earth. 80% of the population will have chronic, meaning not like, you know, something that happens temporarily, chronic low back pain at some point in their life. I'm part of that population. I have chronic low back pain. Whether it's like being born with like a spinal deficiency like I was, or whether it is, you know, through like an injury or just like lack of activity, low back pain is very, very common. And so what happens is, you know, this is caused by poor posture, poor balance, reduced hip strength. It says reduced hip strength. I do not mean hip flexors. I mean glutes. And often that causes lower extremity injuries. You know, a weak core is going to mean that you're going to move your legs the wrong way. Your legs move the wrong way, you're going to tear your ACL. You're going to sprain your ankle, you know? So we want to make sure that we are designing effective core programs to enhance someone's performance, but also reduce their pain and increase function, right? So we want to always, always, always be very systematic and integrated, again, kind of going back to that NASM concept, about writing our programs. We want to make sure that we start with a foundation and then we build upon that foundation slowly, right? So when it comes to core training, right, when it comes to core stabilization, we want to make sure that we are definitely strengthening the multifidus and transverse abdominis. All of that is going to help our clients learn how to hold their spine in place. So we love planks, we love McGill sit-ups, we love bird dogs, we love side planks, we love prone cobras, all of that core stabilization stuff. And what's great is once we've developed that, then we can start working on increasing like the strength of moving our spine. We can go into the strength, you know, once we learn stability, we can learn strength. And then we can start to get into like, you know, doing heavy crunches and heavy sit-ups and hanging leg raises and things like that. Then once we get really good at all that, we can get super explosive at like moving our spine rapidly. And one thing that we know about like core stability, by the way, it even enhances your ability to jump. I don't know if you guys have ever like had like a twinge in your low back from like a landing that you've had. If you've ever done like a jump and then you landed kind of hard and you're like, oh, it kind of hurt my back, right? Like that shouldn't have happened. Your core should have been able to hold your spine in place. The jumping should have been a leg thing. Your legs should have like absorbed that movement. But if they don't, all of that force goes right into your back. This is why sometimes people get low back pain from jogging. And it's like, it's because like all of the impact, their spine is not being held in place the way it is supposed to. So we have seen core training make people jump higher. We have seen it make them run faster. Even though you don't think of you think of the core as like these six-pack muscles that we show off at the beach, or we think of it as like our ability to crunch our spine. They're there to increase our athletic performance. That is how, you know, that's the difference between, you know, an athlete who's, you know, juking someone else and breaking their ankles, you know? So it should always be systematic. It should always be progressive. It should always focus on being functional, and it should use the entire contraction spectrum. That's another thing that people tend to struggle with. A lot of people love the concentric part, and then they just fall back to the ground. So they do like a sit-up, and then they fall. They do the sit-up, and they fall. They do this like, huh, and they just like fall back to the ground, right? Let me see if I can find that. Bad sit-up. I'm not going to find what I want. Anyway, you see people as they start to, actually, you know what? I hate to do this. I hate to do this, but I'm gonna. I'm not trying to make CrossFit look bad. There we go, the anti-WOD. Oh, wait, no, there was a video demo.
Hey everybody, I'm Jeremy, this is Wadwell, and
I don't care. I'm pretty sure, yeah, it's okay. See how, here's what I don't like. They're throwing themselves up, right? She's using her arm, she's throwing really hard, so she's getting a little bit of like concentric action, and then just falling back to the ground. No control on the way back, right? And no isometric contractions. Now, this is not meant to be isometric. This is a competition, right? And so because it's a competition, you know, I get it. I get why they're sacrificing good form. That's a lot of like, we don't care. Again, like when we see like, you know, Taysom Hill running like an amazing, like we don't care about like, oh, that wasn't good form. You know, he didn't pump his arm properly. We don't care about that. We care about like scoring, right? So during an athletic competition, we don't care. But like that's my big issue with like a lot of CrossFit stuff. You see how like they're crunching and they're just kind of falling back, right? She's just throwing themselves back. They're not taking the time to like eccentrically contract. So we want to make sure we are using the entire muscle action spectrum. Don't be that person in the gym who crunches up and falls back down, right? That is not what we want to see. And then we also can make core training more difficult rather than just doing more reps, which is a very common mistake that a lot of people make. They'll just do 500 sit-ups. Rather than doing that, we can manipulate other acute variables to make the exercise more challenging, usually by adding, you know, a proprioceptively enriched environment. Put your client on a stability ball, put them on a Bosu ball, put them on something wobbly. Suddenly that exercise is harder. Create some instability in order to increase the difficulty rather than just doing more reps, which is what most people do. And we're going to focus on neural adaptations. We've already talked about that. But like, you know, we're going to use multiple modalities. We're going to focus on a multisensory environment. We're going to use different pieces of equipment. So our program, again, intervertebral stability, we're focusing on that. Lumbopelvic stability, we're focusing on that. And then movement efficiency. We do want to be able to move. I'm not saying moving is bad. We just want to focus on stability first and movement second. And that's where the OPT comes in. So, Charlie, this is where we start to talk about categories of exercises. In your textbook, and this is, I'm going to send out this exercise checklist today because today is the day that I want to put it out to you. When we look at this exercise checklist, if your client is in the stabilization phase, we have specific core stabilization exercises. So what are core stabilization? What makes something a core stabilization exercise? This is where I always talk about the idea of like, this is a weird analogy, but I talk about like bird watching. You know, if you're bird watching, you have to know the different characteristics of birds in order to like understand which one is which. You know, you gotta look at that one, you gotta look at that one, and it's like, I don't know, they're the same, they're a bird, right? No, that one's got an afro and that one's got a mohawk. You know, like those are two totally different birds, right? They've got different haircuts. And so, or maybe they have like, that one's got spots and that one's got stripes, right? Being able to spot them in the wild. Actually, I just remembered an old analogy I used to use. Do you guys ever, you guys know the difference between, oh God, what is it? Coral snake versus, you guys know the difference between a coral snake and a king snake? One of them is super deadly and the other one is not. These two snakes, one of these will kill you and one of these will be totally safe. And the way that you tell the difference is the coral snake, which is venomous, versus the king snake, which is non-venomous. You can have this as a pet, stay away from this. The way you tell the difference is, this is the rhyme. If red touches yellow, you're a dead fellow. But if red touches black, you're okay, Jack. That's a rhyme that I learned when I was a kid. We had the pet store. But you can see, red touching yellow, dangerous. Stay away from this snake. Red touching black, you're fine. It can't do anything to you. So you need to be able to spot the difference between those two types of snakes. Well, guess what? I want you to be able to spot the difference between 3 different types of core exercises. We've got core stabilization exercises, which, guess what? They focus on stabilization. You got core strength exercises. They focus on core strength. And you've got core power exercises, which focus on core power. So if my client is in the stabilization phase, I'm going to give them core stabilization exercises. If they're in the strength level, I'm sorry, I said phase, I meant level. If they're in the stabilization level, they get stabilization exercises. If they're in the strength level, whether that's phase 2, 3, or 4, they're going to get core strength exercises. And if they're in the power level, they're going to get core power exercises. So what makes something a core stabilization? If you want to be able to spot it in the wild, what characteristics are you looking for? Well, core stabilization exercises are defined by being core exercises that involve little to no movement of the spine. They are focusing on exercises where you draw your belly button toward your spine or you brace. Both of those things are going to activate your local and global stabilization system. So you'll notice if we look at our list here, it's things like marching, right? Marching looks like this. This is a core exercise where you are not moving your spine. You are holding your spine in place. And she's moving her hips, but her spine, she's pulling your belly button towards your spine and she's contracting, right? That's a core stabilization exercise. Or maybe it is the two-legged floor bridge, right? So she's gonna go up and she's gonna hold, and she's holding her spine in place. She might be able to do a little reset, come down for just a second, right? But for the most part, her spine is in the same orientation. She's not performing spinal flexion. She's not performing spinal extension or spinal rotation. Floor prone cobra, the plank, ball bridge, quadruped opposite arm, opposite leg raise. It's a bird dog. Side plank, all of those are exercises that focus on holding your spine in one specific position, not moving them around, right? So here we can see the regular plank, the plank with the leg raise, right? She's adding proprioception here because she's decreasing the stability. Side plank, right? Or a side plank with a leg raise, again, decreasing stability, right? All of those are great. So those are our core stabilization exercises. If your client is in the first level, you are going to only pick exercises from stabilization as a category. If your client is in the strength level, so that could be phase 2 or phase 3 or phase 4, right?
Question, Brad, really quickly. I'm sorry, before you move on.
Go ahead.
All stabilization helps with balance, right?
Yes, and yeah, and vice versa. It's a think of it as a side effect. You know, balance is obviously something we train in the balance part of movement prep, but yeah, absolutely. It's not like it won't happen, you know. Core strength movements. This is all about spinal motion, right? We know how to like hold our spine in place. Let's move it around. So core strength exercises are exercises that involve a full concentric and eccentric range of motion. You know, the stability ball crunch, perfect example. She's moving her spine. Stability ball crunch with rotation. She's doing a spinal rotation. The high long lever crunch. This looks so simple, but it's much, much harder, actually. I love this exercise. Put a little plate in your hand. It's awesome. Or like the long lever crunch with rotation, right? All of those are core strength movements. So if your client's in strength endurance, or if they're in hypertrophy, or if they're in max strength, doesn't matter which phase they're in. If they're in the strength level, they are getting core strength exercises. So anything on this list, right? Ball crunch, back extension, reverse crunches, knee ups, hanging leg raises, cable lifts, cable chops, reverse hyperextensions. All of those are great examples of core strength exercises. And lastly, if our client's in the power, so how do we define that, right? What makes something a core exercise? Again, movement of the spine. Did I just get kicked off Zoom? I think I did.
I'm here.
Okay. I think I just got kicked off. So that is, you know, movement of the spine. That's what we're focusing on there, right? So stabilization, don't move the spine. Strength, move the spine. Then power, move the spine fast, right? So these are core exercises that involve a full range of motion of the spine. So that sentence is literally the same. But we say it at functionally applicable, which is a fancy way of saying fast speeds, right? So the medicine ball pullover throw, or the rotation chest pass, right? Yeah, you could use this as a chest exercise. You can also use it as a core power exercise, right? So that list is also pretty lengthy, right? Although not as lengthy. So rotation chest pass, pullover throw, front oblique throw, soccer throw, side oblique throw. Oops, soccer throws on there twice. Nice. Back extension throw, right? That's the overhead reverse throw. All of those are moving your spine in a rapid manner. So again, when it comes to our stabilization stuff, right? We go from not moving the spine, then we move into the strength stuff where we move our spine, then we move into the power stuff where we move our spine fast and explosively. Now you will notice it says phase 6 here. That's your sport specific training. That's where you would do something that is core based for whatever athlete that you're actually training, like specific to their sport. So go ahead and ignore that phase 6 for now. But phase 1, we use core stabilization. Phases 2, 3, and 4, we use core strength. And phase 5, we use core power. Charlie, how you feeling about all of that? Does that make sense? This is the first time you've seen these core exercises.
Oh, they're good. I mean, either way, Brad, I could always look them up,
What's that?
They're good. I'm good.
Love it. All right. Well, guys, that is that's everything for today when it comes to core and cardio stuff. But we're gonna look at the same thing tomorrow. And guess what? It's gonna look really similar. Balance. It's like balance stabilization, balance strength, balance power. So we name it after like what type of exercise it is and what level you're in. And they have defining characteristics, right? No movement of the spine, full movement of the spine, movement of the spine fast. Tomorrow we're gonna look at balance. No movement of the balance leg, full movement of the balance leg, movement of the balance leg fast, right? They're sort of our defining characteristics. That is why integrated training is progressive. You start with stabilization, you introduce movement, you introduce explosivity. And that is summarizing up a whole PowerPoint in 2 sentences. Any other questions? Noel, Robert, Charlie, you guys got anything for me today? Anything that was too fast or confusing or anything like that?
No, I'm good, bro.
More confusing than ATP, that is? No? All right, we'll go ahead and kill the recording.